This is an empty couch. My guest will be arriving momentarily. Hello everyone, for OneWrestling.com, this is Bill Apter. Welcome to the Apter Chat. One of my favorite people in the entire world, in the entire universe, the man who led the Four Horsemen to their greatest victories. JJ Dillon, welcome back to the Apter Chat.
Hey Bill, how are you?
I'm good, I'm good. Listen, we're taping this, I don't know when these fans are actually going to see this, but we're taping this on May 20th, 2014, and it's been 3 years to this day that we lost the Macho Man, Randy Savage. So I thought I'd talk to you briefly about your memories of Macho Man. You were around him a long time when you were working at the WWE.
Yeah, in fact, I remember him back to his early days when he was playing minor league baseball in Florida and just beginning his wrestling career.
Yeah,
so I knew Randy for a long, long time, followed his career, and then worked in the front office, what was then the WWF, with Randy. He was a consummate professional, a great star in our business, and tragic loss.
Yeah. What was that thing, if you could put your finger on it, that made him different than everybody else?
It's very hard to define. It's you hear the word charisma a lot.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a catch-all phrase, or you hear people in the profession say, "Well, this guy's got it," and charisma are really synonymous with each other, and it's kind of hard to describe, but you could see a guy and say, yeah, he's got it, and certainly Randy Savage had it, and that was a part of his success.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So, reason I asked you to come on, besides just saying hello, about a week ago, I ran an interview that I did down in Gwinnett, Georgia, Lawrenceville, Georgia, where Mr. Wrestling #2 and Randy Rose were the guests of the Gwinnett Braves, where my son works as the promotions and marketing manager. And Mr. Wrestling #2, Johnny Walker, not to be confused with the Booze, of course, was so upbeat about what was going to happen to him a few days later, and that was that he was taking a trip to be inducted in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the Upper New York State building there. And I know that you've been involved with that Hall of Fame for many years. So I'd like to hear your JJ Dillon reporting, eyewitness report here. If you could tell us about the weekend.
Well, I'd be delighted to. George Steele was the one that first directed me and told me what a unique place it was, and something that I had to definitely check.
Well, wait a minute. If it was George Steele, he must have said, "Nice."
Nice.
Right. Go ahead.
So I did. I went up there in 2006 was the first year that I went, and I've been back every year since for induction weekend. And I've made a couple of other promotional appearances in support of it. It's nonprofit. It's not affiliated with any promotion, any federation. And if you read, and it's all there on their website, the process by which the inductees are selected each year, it's something that Tony Villano, the founder and president, really put a lot of thought in and refined over the years. And what makes it so significant is that it's an honor just to have your name on the ballot, because the committee that does the ballot each year changes. So it's not a situation where it could become a political thing, or somebody could fast track somebody to try and get them in. And then once the committee puts the ballot together, they don't vote. There's a separate body that votes of a minimum of 30 people that are usually former inductees, outstanding people in the profession, respected historians, and that body of voters changes by at least half every year. Again, so that somebody can't, keep putting somebody's name back on the ballot and figure, well, eventually they're going to get in. The integrity of the process is something that Tony Villano really strictly guards. It's an honor to be on the ballot and then to be voted by your peers. And I don't care what you do in your life, and certainly in the world of professional wrestling, the people that you travel with, that you were on the road with, that you were in the ring with, when they look at your body of work and deem you worthy of being recognized and having a plaque on the wall and having one of these rings.
Show us that. Would you hold that right up to the camera, please?
Yeah.
Like right there. That's good. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a
Congratulations.
Ring. It's very heavyweight wise, and it's just
well, a lot of heavyweights are in that Hall of Fame. So
yeah, it's a great honor. And when your plaque goes on the wall every year, that plaque remains there, and as each new class is inducted, another string goes up. So when I like to go to the museum because they're constantly adding things and moving it around and freshening it up, and you start with the inaugural class, and as you look at all the names, you say, yes, he deserves to be there, should be there. And as you go from year to year to year, and there's always discrepancy of opinions about, well, I think this guy should be in or that guy should be in. But the longer that this goes on, and this year was a typical year, because in the colleague division, which kind of where I fell in, which looked at my wrestling career, managerial career, career as an executive, as an author, all the things that I did, looking at the total body.
Such a storied career you've had. Wow.
Yeah. And this year, on the ballot and voted in was Playboy Gary Hart.
Now, before we go any further, and talk about the people who were in it this year, I want to thank, you'll be seeing some pictures popping up during this, and I really want to thank Greg Oliver, and go to Google and put in Slam Wrestling. It's a great website, and the terrific photographer Andrea Calloway. She'll kill me for not saying that first name right, because my wife's name is Andrea too, so it should have just rolled off my tongue. But Andrea Calloway, thank you so much for the pictures here that you'll be seeing when JJ talks. So Gary Hart, one of my favorite managers, who used to always greet me with, "Hello, my man."
Yeah, and I had the pleasure of inducting him, and when I started in the business in Charlotte, 1971, which was it was predominantly tag team wrestling was very popular. A lot of great teams there, and possibly the greatest team was Rip Hawk and Swede Hansen, who were managed by Playboy Gary Hart. So right from the beginning of my career, I knew Gary. I was around him in Georgia. I was around him in Florida. Gary Hart's Army, really, with Pak Song Nam, was the basis by which Dusty Rhodes, the persona of the American Dream, started to combat Gary Hart's Army. And then, of course, he kind of settled into Texas, and the Von Erich kids were growing up, and he, I think, was a big part of grooming those kids to have the success that they did. And, of course, tragically, all the Kevin past, that's one of the sad stories of our,
it really is.
Of our business.
While you're talking about, go ahead.
And we lost Gary way too early too. He was a personal friend of mine.
Yeah, what a great guy.
And I said at the comments that, as I always regarded Bobby the Brain Heenan as the greatest manager of all time. Mm-hmm. And he set the bar by which all the rest of us were measured. And I look at, I did a Legends Roundtable on managing. And one of the questions that was thrown out by Gene Okerlund was, Mount Rushmore with the 4 presidents, if you were going to have a Mount Rushmore of wrestling managers, who would your 4 be? And I remember, obviously, in fairness, disqualified myself, and the 4 were, as I remember, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and then Playboy Gary Hart, Jim Cornette, and I think I had Jimmy Hart, who's right up there.
You should have been on there as well.
The 4th, And since then, I've elevated Paul Heyman because when
Oh yeah.
everybody said, "Hey, man, the role of the manager is gone. It doesn't. There's no place for it anymore." And along comes a Brock Lesnar, and we see firsthand the value of a really
Of the
skilled
manager,
manager.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I always was very high on Paul Heyman, but his stock went up dramatically when I saw all that he's done the last 2 years. And I said publicly at the induction that someday Paul Heyman will have a Hall of Fame ring because he deserves
Actually, August 5th, 2014 is the release of the My Name is Paul Heyman DVD. You're on it and I'm on it. And I'm very anxious to see that. Let's go down when you're talking about Texas, another person who was inducted this year, of course, and his wife was there for him, Barbara Brody, Barbara
Yes.
Goodish. Bruiser Brody was also inducted this year.
Yeah, and he was a controversial figure. He was not well liked by a lot of promoters because he was a guy who wasn't very shy, and Stan Hansen, who introduced him, alluded to that fact. And Stan said that one of the reasons that he was so successful was that, yes, Stan was a big part of the brawn, as was Bruiser Brody, but Bruiser was the brains that really understood the business and understood how to politically put yourself in a position when you had the power to do so. And he attributed his success, not only here, but in Japan, to his friendship and what he learned for Bruiser Brody. And that's an interesting story, too, because in 1979, I spent the entire year in Australia, and Barbara was a receptionist at the Texas Tavern where we all stayed, and that's where Bruiser Brody and first met her.
Oh, I know.
He returned to the States.
I know this story.
Said, I'm going to bring you over, and of course, a lot of people thought, maybe it was just a fling. You'll never hear from him, but there was something to that relationship.
It was for them. It was forever.
Yes, they were meant to be together. They were married, had a son, and of course, we all know the rest of the story about the tragic death. And I think it was good that at the Hall of Fame induction, that part of the story never brought up, because there's really nothing positive that you could say about the tragic way that Bruiser Brody died. But I had not seen Barbara since 1979, 35 years since I'd seen her.
She still looks amazing.
Yeah, she sure does. And great personality.
So one of my favorite people, and we discussed him at the beginning of this, and we're not talking about the drink, we're talking about the man known as Two. You were 4. He was 2. So Johnny Walker, who became a legend as Mr. Wrestling number 2, and down in like Georgia and that territory and all that, he was to that region what Hulk Hogan was to the entire business, with all the thousands of fans when he'd come out of the dressing room, two. Oh, that knee power lift. Wow.
And former governor and later president Jimmy Carter, his mother Lillian Carter used to come and sit front row ringside in Columbus every week.
Yeah.
And her favorite wrestler was Mr. Wrestling number 2.
Yeah. Do you remember when he was invited to the White House?
I remember the story that when Jimmy Carter was elected president, Wrestling 2 was invited to come for the inauguration.
And he didn't go.
He was told that if he attended, he would have to come without the mask, and he respectfully declined because that mask that's what he was all about.
Yeah.
Just the fact that he was invited, and I remember that classic picture where President Jimmy Carter has the headlock on Mr. Wrestling 2.
Yeah, they were big wrestling. And a bit of trivia here, his wife, Olivia, was one of my favorite, I keep saying people are my favorite people in the universe, but she really was. And I absolutely adored her. And she's the one who made all the robes for not only country music stars, but Greg Valentine, all those Ric Flair robes when he used to spread his wings there. And I was at their house when she was making the robes for Brian Blair and Jim Brunzell when they worked as the Killer Bees. I got to try the jackets on.
I was at the museum with two when we took the tour. And one of the things because many of the robes are there on display, and I never made that mental connection. Because you kind of get just there's so much there to see and to absorb. And he looked at the robes and he pointed and he said, "My wife made
That's
that
an
robe."
Olivia, yeah.
So that really,
yeah,
it was,
quite good, yeah. Yeah,
yeah, it
what I,
was an emotional thing for him, in addition to the fact that he had a plaque on the wall and had a ring, and yet here was her work distributed all throughout the museum. So it was.
now there's a connection that you had with him that you told me a few days ago when you got back, and I asked you if you wouldn't mind to please tell that story to our viewers here at the Apter Chat.
Yeah, I kind of got with Dave Milliken, who is a master craftsman in making replica belts and new belts. And
Reggie Parks' protege.
Yeah, he was Reggie Parks' protege, and that's how it all started for him. And I saw his work at the Fan Fest in Charlotte last year, and I really, for the first time, looked at the quality of the craftsmanship and found out that the one belt, the 10 pounds of gold with the globe on the front, which I think is the most beautiful NWA belt ever, and that I actually had wrestled Jack Briscoe when he was champion, and I was in Amarillo and had a title match against Jack in Odessa, Texas.
Yeah.
And the picture of Jack, and the belt was refurbished like 4 different times, and the flags on the outside weren't always in the same position. And Dave Milliken was able to take that picture and exactly recreate it, and I have that belt, and I've had it signed by the 5 living people. But I had Harley and Flair and Dusty and Terry Funk and Wildheart Tommy Rich, who were the other people that wore it. Of course, Giant Baba has passed away, as Jack himself, and the Kerry Von Erich. But after I ordered that belt, and I saw 2 at the Fan Fest, and I unfortunately, it was the first time I saw him in many years, and I really didn't have a chance to sit down and talk with him. It's very hectic. And after, as I was talking to Dave Milliken, he said, I have a picture when you were the Florida heavyweight champion.
I remember that.
Out of the picture here for just a minute.
I remember that.
And this is the picture.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that.
Trying to get some reflection off of it. And I'm actually wearing the Florida belt. And he said there were a couple of versions of that. And he said, I refurbished this belt. And he said, I can make an exact duplicate with the colors as they were on this belt. And so I looked on Wikipedia at the list of champions, and it's like, oh, the who's who of wrestling. And yes, my name is there.
Yeah.
Who did I win the belt from? I won it from Wrestling 2, and then 20 days later, I lost it back to him. So I did.
Was he Wrestling 2 at that time?
I'm sorry?
Was he Wrestling 2 at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I did some research, and I found out there was a lot more to the story. And I was actually managing more, wrestling less at the time. This was, I think, 1981. And I was managing the Spoiler, Jimmy Garvin, and Tu and I had a few verbal battles, and he was so angry with me and wanted to get me into the ring and to destroy me that on one of the interviews he said, I could beat you with one hand tied behind my back. And of course, once the words came out of his mouth, I said, that's not such a bad idea. I think I could accept the challenge on that basis. And he was Florida champion. And I said, if you're that confident, certainly you would have no problem putting the belt on the line. And of course, he couldn't very well say no. And the match took place in Orlando, and they had a rope, and they put like a lasso noose around his wrist, put him in the hammerlock position, and as they're wrapping a rope around his waist to tie it down so he had one free hand, I don't know what overcame me, but I sucker punched him and then had a double advantage, and that's how I won the Florida
got the belt,
title.
yeah.
Then
We covered that in the magazines, by the way. I remember the outrage.
I refused to give him a rematch because I felt that he wasn't worthy. And then pressure came to bear on me that, hey, I had to give him a rematch. So 20 days later, at what was their big show every month, was at the Bayfront Center. The return match took place, and I lost the title back to him. But this is the replica belt that I received about 2 weeks before.
Look at that. Wow.
Yeah.
I remember that belt so well because I photographed so many of the champions wearing that. It's
and
amazing.
If you look over here, I signed one side of it because at the time I was King James.
I remember that.
And I was King James, JJ Dillon. And when I saw Stu up at the Hall of Fame induction, I asked him if he would be willing to sign the other side.
Look at that.
And there's Mr.
That's
Wrestling
great.
to John Walker, and he was gracious enough to sign it for me. And I have a case for it, and I'm going to proudly display it.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Boy, I might jump through the camera and take that and put it down in Apter's alley. I mean, that's amazing. That's great. Tell us about some of the other inductions that went on over the weekend.
From the Pioneer Division was Stu Hart and Leroy McGurk, both of which I never met Leroy McGurk. Of course, I met Stu Hart. I wrestled in Calgary for a week because I thought my career would never be complete without going to Calgary, being around Stu and Helen, take a tour of the mansion, and to see the dungeon, which I did on the way back from Japan.
The father of Bret Hart and all the other great Harts,
the late Owen Hart, and he was a very respected wrestler in his own right, going back to the days when Paul Bosch was active in New York.
Oh, sure. And he could tell the longest stories, but between each word was, I will tell you, and you'd sit there going like, okay, and you'd sit there for hours, he'd get one story out, but they were all fascinating. Great storyteller.
Yeah,
Who else, JJ?
He was a great character. Greg Valentine brought his name up and said that's where he broke in up there.
Yeah, that's right.
And he said 40 degrees below, Stu would be out walking around in bare feet. He was a man's man, and the stories that are told about Stu Hart. So he certainly was worthy of the recognition, as was the Leroy McGurk, who was a very polished wrestler in his own right, as as being a respected promoter.
And the dad of Mike McGurk, the former WWE ring announcer, correct?
Yeah. Brian Blair was the MC this year, and he made a reference to the fact that he told a hilarious story of when he was married to Mike McGurk, and he was, right before I think they got married, he was going to the house, and the father didn't want wrestlers in the house. And so she was going to take him and be very careful that hopefully there would not be an encounter between Brian and Stu and with Leroy until she could kind of gauge the situation and set the stage. So he was in the kitchen, and she went somewhere, and all of a sudden the door flung open, and in came somebody, and Mike didn't know that her father was awake and walking around the house, and he came into the kitchen, and he was feeling his way around, and Brian was holding his breath, just praying that he wouldn't realize that somebody else was in there, and he backed against the wall, and as it ended up, Leroy never knew that he was there, but it was a great
story. You mentioned Greg Valentine. Greg Valentine started off as one of the Fargo wrestlers, and of course Don Fargo, I believe, was inducted this year as well.
Yes, in the tag team division, it was Jackie and Don Fargo, and Don Fargo's had more names than, and I looked up on Greg Oliver's website, who had done a story in one of the books on him, because I wasn't sure of his age, and I was reluctant to ask him, and I assumed what Greg Oliver put in there was accurate, that Don Colt was born in 1928, which would make him 86 years old.
Woo!
And he still gets around remarkably well, and he and Greg Valentine told some stories that had tears running down people's faces, because he's a
great storyteller. I remember back in 1970 when Greg Valentine, 71, was just kind of cutting his teeth there, and up in upstate New York for Pedro Martinez, he introduced himself as a Fargo to me, so I never forgot that. Who else, JJ, was there anyone else that we missed?
Just in what was called the TV area, of course, was Bruiser Brody,
and that we
wrestling too. And then the modern era was Bill Eadie, who spoke last and very eloquent.
Mass superstar,
just a very, very articulate speaker, and somebody that's incredibly highly respected.
Oh yeah. Mass superstar who feuded with two, by the way, a lot, and he also was half of Demolition, of course.
Demolition, yes.
And he used to sing with Steve.
He used to category who was the other potential living inductee that could have been there was Don Morocco, and Don had recently had hip replacement surgery, and because of the healing process, the doctors wouldn't allow him to take that flight from Hawaii, but he very much wanted to be there.
Well, maybe next year. I love anytime I hear Don Morocco's name in my head, I hear Jimmy Snuka going, Don Morocco, brother, all the time, all the time.
And in the ladies division was Sherry Martel and Joyce Grable, who everybody was delighted to see because last year Joyce was there facing a battle with cancer.
Yes.
And she vowed to fight it and to win, and she said, and I will be back. And it was
and she's there.
She's boy, one tough gal, and she kept her word and was back this year and was thrilled to be able to induct Sherry Martel, who she had great respect for.
What a great lady. Yeah.
And then I inducted Gary Hart in the colleague division, and then the other one in the international division was Lord Alfred Hayes.
Oh,
and he certainly was worthy too. So this year was a great class. 3 of the 4 living inductees were there. Don Rocco would have been there, other than being under doctor's orders not to come. We had a great turnout. We were back at the Holiday Inn in Johnstown, which is about
that's Johnstown, New York,
13 miles from where the museum is, and a quick ride over there. So transportation was never a problem, and they have a street fair they've had a street fair the last 4 years where the main street where the Hall of Fame is located is closed off, and they have vendors, and it started with 30 the first year, and I think this year they had over 130 vendors, and as bad as it rained Friday, the weather was wonderful Saturday, and just had a great time. I love going back to the museum. It's
now the fans can go. The fans can go.
Every baseball fan someday has to make a pilgrimage to Cooperstown to the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is only about 45 minutes away from Amsterdam. And if you're a true wrestling fan, you someday have to go because, you know, I'm complimented often as being somebody who's well spoken, and I cannot adequately describe in words how fabulous that museum is. I say that you have to go and see it for yourself.
I'm going to do that. Unfortunately, for me, every year this falls upon my wedding anniversary, and since I'm doing wrestling stuff 365 days a year, there are 2 or 3 days in the year that my wife says, can we do something else? So, but next year...
Maybe we should start a petition and somehow present it to your wife, Andrea, asking if maybe you could get permission just 1 year.
Next year.
It continues to fall on your anniversary.
Next year.
Kind of give you a pass to allow you to come up there. Because of all the people who would really appreciate it, you would be.
Thank you.
You would be one.
Thank you. Definitely. And of course, you fans can go to Google and put in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. It's pwhf.org.
.org, yes.
Yes, you can go there and check it out.
So they're subsidized by, we do an autograph signing, and nobody gets any money. All that money goes to the hall. They have sponsorships.
But they can go and visit. They can go and visit. They can go and visit. Call there. Go to the website. You'll see when they're open. Also, don't forget, JJ Dillon has got a book out. Been out for quite a while. You can go to Amazon.com, correct? And
I don't know if it's on there anymore. The original printing was 3,000, and the last conversation I had with Scott Teal, there were less than 30 left.
Wow. And so where can they get in touch with you?
I think if there's a reprint, it'll be a soft cover. So
okay.
It was never in bookstores, and the people that have read it are highly complimentary. And
I love the book.
Boy,
I love the book.
That really makes me feel good. But you could go to my website, jjdillon.com.
There you go.
And I have 2 sections on there. One, when I was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame as part of the Four Horsemen, with a lot of behind-the-scenes pictures with my family. And recently, I added another section in which the website was kind of refurbished, and there's a PW Hall of Fame that you can click on.
A link.
And
Yeah,
there
a
were pictures from
hyperlink.
last year, and I also included some shots from inside the museum so that you get a little sense of what a fabulous place it really
All
is.
right. And once again, thank you, Greg Oliver. And go to Google and put in Slam Wrestling and Andrea Calloway for the use of the photos. And JJ, you are, and I know I've told you this a zillion times, you are such a credit to what the business was and is and keeps going. And I want to thank you for everything you've also done for me. There's stories about things you've done for me personally in this business that I could never thank you enough.
Well, it goes both ways because before the internet, before all those other things, all those years that you were, covering stories, covering the different talent.
Yeah.
You were the guy taking pictures, doing the stories, and that was really the way that the fans found out about the different personalities. And you certainly helped my career
Well,
and
thank you.
and helped
Thank
the Four Horsemen. So it was a two-way street.
I was
had
part of a bunch of great.
respect for you.
Thank you. I was part of a bunch of great teams, but I was the guy out there, out in the fields there, out in
You were in
the
the trenches.
trenches. Yeah, I was there out in the trenches, and it was nice people like you that suggested to a lot of promoters, "Hey, put this guy on TV." And that's how the fans got to know me, and I really appreciate that. JJ, do this with everybody. That's, if you wouldn't mind pointing right to the camera with your index finger. There's Bill Apter and JJ Dillon. We'll see you at the matches.